Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the UE FIFA CIS Sports Management Public Lecture hosted by the Department of Management Studies. My name is Calicia Gregoire. I'm the Sports Management Program Coordinator. With us is Ms. Dylan Cabrales, who is the UE FIFA CIS Sports Management Program Director. Today's session is on the topic Challenging Traditional Sports Marketing Rules, Learning from Red Bull, New York Cosmos, and FIFA Experiences. Our guest speaker is Ms. Marianne Cornejo, who is the Technical Leadership Expert at FIFA. With almost 15 years of international sports administration experience across areas such as marketing, operations, and management, Marianne has developed an appreciation for the idiosyncrasies of sports business, particularly when it comes to sports marketing. She is also a graduate of the FIFA International Master in Management, Law, and Humanities of Sport. The presentation will look at the workings behind Red Bull's unconventional approach as well as the notable success of New York Cosmos, while gaining valuable insights from FIFA's innovative strategies that revolutionized the world of football marketing. Before we begin, I would like to remind all attendees that you can participate in the lecture by typing your questions in the chat. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the lecture. You can utilize your raise your hand tool to proceed to ask a question. In case you cannot follow the entire session, you will be provided with the link to the recording afterwards. So let's get started. Marianne, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Calicia. I'm just going to share the screen. All right. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Super. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I would have absolutely loved to be there in person. It would have been such a treat. But I am very, very pregnant, and so it was unfortunately no longer possible. But I look forward to sharing with you. Hopefully, we can find a way, even though this is online, to make it more interactive. So as Calicia mentioned, we have the chat box, so please feel free to ask your questions there. And if not, I will do my best to circle back to them at the end during the Q&A session. So as Calicia said, the topic today is challenging traditional sports marketing rules, and it's my learnings from Red Bull, New York Cosmos, and FIFA. And how I have organized the lecture a bit is it kind of in do's and don'ts. What I learned in theory in school through my undergraduate and master's degrees, and then what I have seen in practice in these specific organizations in sports. With that, I am very lucky to have one of your fellow trainees as a colleague of mine, Anton Cornejo. Some of you may know him. He's the technical director for Trinidad and Tobago Football Association. We were together at a workshop just now in December in Japan, and I went through the presentation with him, and he also gave me some context into the reality of what it's like in Trinidad and Tobago at the moment when it comes to sports marketing. So hopefully we can make this presentation relevant to you, or it can trigger some creative thinking or a fresh approach. But yes, I'm very lucky to work with one of your fellow countrymen who is always such a pleasure to collaborate with. So with that, I will start with the first rule of marketing that surprised me, what I learned in school versus what I saw in practice. And this is Red Bull's philosophy: don't talk about yourself. So this movie, Fight Club, some of you may be familiar with it. The first rule of Fight Club is we do not talk about Fight Club, right? So that is, interestingly enough, Red Bull's philosophy on talking about itself, which I didn't anticipate. I hadn't really noticed that before joining. So what I mean is these, for example, press releases. That's something that I worked on in university, that we were just kind of shown that this is what's expected that you do. You talk about yourself, you announce things. You as an organization are the one that's bringing out the information, and Red Bull's approach just couldn't be more different. What they do brilliantly well is that they yield the floor to those who best represent the brand authentically. And they don't just do it in a stale press release that has no benefit to anybody. They do it in creative ways that ties into emotion, that ties into performance, into competition, into lifestyle. And so they really, as a brand, do not talk about themselves. And that applies to all employees. So before the call started, I was speaking with Calicia about my experience and especially in presenting with students and such. When I was at Red Bull, a presentation like this is not something I would have been able to do because I couldn't have spoken about my experience within the brand because that goes against the philosophy. So that's something that they really, at every rung of the ladder, Red Bull as a brand, the employees, the company is not talking about itself. It's just their ambassadors. So mainly their athletes and their talent in the cultural sphere. So DJs or dancers, etc. Don't be fully transparent. So this was also a surprise to me because every job I have ever started, the onboarding process, it's like, this is our history, this is what we have done, this is where we're going, etc. And with Red Bull, this just doesn't exist. There is no official brand story. So I have examples here of two books about Red Bull and how it started and its approach, and they're all unofficial because there is no official story. As an employee, when you're onboarded onto the philosophy, but we don't go into details about how did he come up with the formula, the founder. This is Dietrich Mateschitz, that's his picture on the left. How did he come up with a formula, or where was the inspiration coming from, or how long did he work on it? Like these details that are usually so readily available for other brands, Red Bull, once again, just doesn't talk about itself. There's no transparency in that sense of, here we are as a brand, we show you everything, this is what we do, start to finish. There's a lot of privacy and reservation and mystery. And that, I think, really ties into the allure of Red Bull as a brand. Don't sell the product. So here we have the Cristiano Ronaldo, one of my favorite athletes, selling a product. And I don't know about you, but I find this so incredibly unbelievable that the man who would move aside a Coca-Cola can because it's unhealthy and say the message that people should be drinking water would be at any point ordering, much less eating a bucket of chicken. So it's inauthentic. It doesn't come across as relevant to the athlete. It's not good marketing. Whereas when you sell the lifestyle, like Cristiano has done, for example, with Nike, it's a much more impactful marketing approach. So on the left, we have his collaboration with Nike, the fitness app, where he has a couple of workouts that you can do and he's narrating it or he's showing you how to do it. That's very believable. I believe that Cristiano does these exercises, or that he at least approves of them enough to have done this video. And then in the middle, we have a prank he did where he dressed up as a houseless person and he challenged people on the street with football tricks and such in costume. And then lastly, we have him in his natural lifestyle coverage, wearing Nike, coming and going from the stadiums and such. It's much more effective to sell the lifestyle versus the product. The product will kind of sell itself if the lifestyle is being communicated effectively. Do establish your values and stay true to them. This was something that I also found very interesting about Red Bull when I came on as an employee, is how much time they spent in the recruitment process on values. So these are the Red Bull values for team members. And for me personally, the ones that I have highlighted here in orange were the most surprising. So there was a lot of focus during the interview process on entrepreneurial instincts or entrepreneurial approaches, which I had never had in an organization. I had always been an employee, and entrepreneurial thinking or approaches just didn't really seem to be a priority. Whereas at Red Bull, they really emphasize it because they want people that take ownership over the projects. So they have this entrepreneurial mindset where this is your project, this is your task, you own it start to finish kind of thing. And also this loves life, work, and play. That's also very important for Red Bull. It's a brand that has positioned itself as being very youthful and very cool and very fun, and you want to be a part of it. But they really push for that to be, once again, authentic. So not just something that's presented front of house, but that the people working also enjoy their life and enjoy their time together, both work and outside, and that they love life, work, and play. That's a commonality amongst employees, and I can really testify to that being true. And lastly, this organizationally aligned. So especially in the sports marketing department, there's a real understanding of what the brand is and is not. So you will hear very often when ideas are being floated or we're expanding a project or starting one, for somebody to say that doesn't feel very bullish, or that's Red Bull, that's bullish, because it's organizationally aligned and we all share an understanding of what the organization strives to accomplish. And FIFA, I know it's a very large organization. It can be controversial. There's many opinions about it. I and Anton are currently working in the technical leadership department. And what that team does is they work with technical directors from federations all around the world, all the federations, on developing their grassroots, amateur, women's football, etc. And what I have seen in that team and in our efforts, our initiatives, is that the values are really at the core of what we strive to do and how we do what we do. So it's not something that's just on the wall. One of my colleagues always says, take it off the wall, like your brand values or your mission statements, your vision, and put it on the floor. Like really step on it, engage with it, make sure you're checking your initiatives against it, that you're living up to these values, because they really will shape the products that you come up with or the campaigns in the case of sports marketing. Do short and long-term planning. So for me, when I was studying undergraduate, it really felt like the focus was on the short term. They were campaigns for the next 6 months or for the next year or whatnot. And what I have really seen creates effective marketing is this combination of short and long-term planning. So for example, FIFA, in our technical leadership team, we're part of the global football development larger group, and they just invested 200 million over the next 3-year cycle to secure the future of sport across elite, amateur, and grassroots programs. So this includes funding for training facilities, coaching programs, and youth tournaments to really nurture talent at every level, creating this kind of pipeline. And it's not very sexy. So for example, when it comes to what you would think of sports marketing for FIFA, maybe 98% would immediately think of the Men's World Cup. And that's the top 2% of football all across the world, or the top 1%. Whereas that 98% is really what creates this talent at the very top. And so FIFA is putting its resources behind long-term development, long-term investment, long-term planning, from grassroots all the way up to elite and A teams, national A teams. This is something that I wanted to share with you because it's something that we introduce in our workshops for leadership development of technical directors. It's the importance of perspective. So if I were to ask you where you are, either for a product or your team or your organization or yourself, where you are now, where you visualize yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, and where you want to be, where you could see yourself realistically, or where you would set your goal to be, it can seem like a very daunting task going from, for example, a 3 to a 9. But if instead of doing that, you see yourself at, okay, if I were a 9, what would my project be like? What would my role be like? My responsibilities, my team, my etc. And see kind of how you could work backwards to get there. It can seem much more possible. You see more solutions, more opportunities, instead of just this like uphill climb that could be very, very difficult to go through. So I just encourage you to maybe sometimes change your perspective a bit, especially when it comes to long-term planning. And with that, I go a little bit on a tangent here just to introduce this project that is very, very close to my heart. It's the Red Bull MotoGP Rookies Cup. So it's the development program from Red Bull in two-wheel motorsports. And so this program is very unique in that the riders who are 12 to 17 years old are not paying to be a part of it. Motorsport is a very expensive and in so being elitist sport where only those who can pay have traditionally had the opportunity to continue to develop. And Rookies Cup is phenomenal and very much respected in the paddock and in motorsport because it lets these youngsters compete and train for free using the bikes, the coaches, the medical, everything from the highest level of two-wheel motorsport, which is MotoGP standards, because it's a part of that configuration. And once more here, we have this focus on long-term development. So this sustainable talent development pipeline that Red Bull has is critical to the success of every step of the ladder. So with Rookies Cup, you start, that's amateur, and then they would go professional into Moto3, where Red Bull has a team that they sponsor, and then Moto2, and then MotoGP. So they're not just coming in at the top, they are starting at the bottom, not the bottom, so to speak, with less experience with the youngsters, with the grassroots, and investing all the way through, making sure that they have platforms at every level that they can bring riders through who have the talent to accurately and best represent the brand and to get those podium finishes and such. And this is an approach that Red Bull takes with its athletes overall. So it is very rare for Red Bull to form a partnership with an athlete that is already at the peak of his or her performance. What Red Bull really likes to do is to develop with the athlete, to start young with them when they're really showing that those beginning stages of promise or advanced talent, and to provide them the tools, the support to develop and to grow with Red Bull as a brand, versus a cheesy slapping of a logo on the shirt and that's it, he's our athlete. It's to develop and grow the athlete together. Trust in the experts. And so this was also something that surprised me very much working with Red Bull specifically, because I thought that if I was hired in a marketing role in an organization, that I was seen or expected to be the marketing expert. And that is just not how Red Bull does it. So when it comes to projects and events for Red Bull, who are considered the experts truly are the athletes, the local markets, and the specialists. And we, as the marketing, for example, at headquarters, which is where I was based, we, as the marketing professionals there, are more in charge of evaluating, elevating, so challenging ideas, making sure that they connect to our global initiatives, to our global brand. But we're not the ones that are proposing, and I can illustrate exactly why. So here we have two of Red Bull events that I personally was fascinated by. One is Red Bull Tuck It out of India. So it was a tuk-tuk race that the market there proposed. And the other one is a Red Bull Los Andes out of Chile. These projects came out of those countries because they know their market best. What can I, as a Mexican woman who grew up in California, tell Red Bull India about how they can engage with their market? I can't. But once they present an idea to me of what makes sense for their market, then with the knowledge that I have of the brand marketing, I can elevate that. I can challenge it. We can work together. We can also find if, for example, this event would work well in Thailand, that also has a lot of tuk-tuks, etc. So that's the kind of approach that Red Bull takes when it comes to events. We really leave it to the local market, and the role that we have is to ensure that it applies, and that if you as a consumer leave Trinidad and Tobago and go to Argentina, that your feeling, your interactions with the brands, the visibility of Red Bull is uniform, that it feels like the same organization, that we have the same goals, the same language. Another example of experts coming in with a project is this one, the Red Bull Stratos. Red Bull's probably most famous athlete project that has ever happened. This was in 2012. And I took this quote from an article that I found really interesting. For most brands, a risky marketing move consists of not testing the copy on that new ad. And copy would be just marketing terms for the text or the slogan or whatnot. Red Bull's idea of risk is that one of its sponsored athletes' bodily fluids will turn into gas as he plummets 24 miles from space at 800 plus miles per hour, while his parents, girlfriend, and the rest of the world watch live. More than 8 million viewers on YouTube alone. So this is one of those things where if Red Bull had ever been searching for a project of this size or of this risk or of this level, we would have never found it as a brand, as the marketing experts, because we don't know the sport, we don't know the technicalities, whereas our athletes do. And this project came about because Felix was burning for it. He proposed it to Red Bull. He said, this is something that I really want to do. I want to break the world record. I want to show that this can be done. And instead of Red Bull saying, absolutely not, no way, they used the resources of the brand to bring the top experts in every area that needed to be consulted with to make this possible. And so it's something that the brand could have ever come up with. It's from trusting that the athletes are the experts and then seeing how we can support them in really breaking new records, reaching new levels, etc. And that transitions nicely also into this don't avoid risk. So I think as a brand, especially in university, we're made very aware that you could potentially be one marketing mistake away from a catastrophe. And that's not how Red Bull sees risk. So Red Bull doesn't avoid it. Red Bull kind of leans into it. So the way that they do this, and this is another example of cliff diving, for example, the way Red Bull manages these projects that seem so extreme and such is through effective risk management. So there's nothing about Red Bull projects that are risky, that is left to chance, or that is not consulted with at the highest levels of expertise. We make data-backed assessments, so it's not by feeling, it's not by tradition, what has been done before, how it has always been, etc. It's very much data-backed, and we check our fear. So we really see where it's coming from, the hesitations, are they founded, are they not? What's leading into it? It's becoming comfortable with this risk and leaning into it in order to manage it effectively and not let it be what drives our marketing efforts. And with that, a small sidebar, everything that Red Bull does in terms of events and projects and such is seen as a marketing expense. So this is something that the brand, you don't have to, for example, when you're coming up with a marketing campaign, immediately project the sales bump or the financial benefit that could come from it, because there's so many other things to consider, like word of mouth, which is something that Red Bull values very highly, in terms of the impact that an event or a project can create for the brand and the representation of the brand's values through those projects. Don't stay satisfied. You would think that a brand that performs at the level that Red Bull is perceived as performing at, which is a very, very high level, would, after a successful race weekend or after a successful project, kind of pat themselves on the back, move on to the next one. But something that was really at the core of my team when I was with the brand was to stay hungry even after success. So after every race weekend, after every project, we would sit down as a team and review, firstly, notes and incidents. So we had a Google document that we kept open throughout the project or the race weekend or whatever it may be, where people were just adding in their observations. It was kind of freestyle writing. You just wrote in something that you thought could be helpful to the group later, or something you noticed, something that could improve, something we could change, etc. So we just kept everything in there so we could have those specific details that are later forgotten. And the Google Docs was great because it was something that you could also just have on your phone. So as you were going around and doing different things, something comes up, you type it in quickly, and then we would sit down, put it up, go through the notes together, and review all of the contributions that had been made. Then the second step was identifying successes and areas of improvement. So I would say maybe 20% was identifying successes and 80% was this focus on areas of improvement, because it's not that we were critical of our work, we were just eager to do it better next time. It was like an exciting challenge to always change it up. You know, you have 22 race weekends, for example, in MotoGP. And so you can get kind of into this rat race mentality of, yeah, next weekend it'll be the same thing. Whereas we were always curious of how we could do it better, how we could do it different. And that created a very collaborative and exciting work environment. And then lastly, it was assigning follow-up to the tasks and identifying the person responsible. So within that same Google document, as we worked through it and took notes and formatted and combined ideas and such, we would identify somebody who was responsible for pushing whatever was valuable forward. So there were maybe deadlines attributed, or there was a person responsible, etc., that we made sure that knowledge, that learning was not lost. And I think this experience that I had in Red Bull made me super fanatical about debriefs, because I think that they're so valuable. There's so many learnings that happen that you can apply, and if you don't take the time to reflect, you lose it. So I would strongly encourage, if debriefing is not a part of your marketing efforts, I would encourage you to try it. Don't do things alone. And with this, I'm not sure, I can't see the questions, but check out the chat to see if there's any questions so far? No, okay, good. If there's any questions, please write them in there and Calicia will let me know. So don't do things alone. I think that this is the topic of sponsorship and partnership is something that you as a diploma will explore more in the third module, if I'm not mistaken. But I did want to tell you something about how Red Bull approaches it, which I thought was very innovative as well. So when you see an example of the Rookies Cup, for example, there's 25 young riders. It's an incredibly expensive, complicated program to run. How is it possible for a brand to do this sustainably? They're now in their 18th year, I believe, or 19th year. So it's something that has been operating long term. How is that possible? And the way that it manages to survive year after year through budget cuts or scrutinies is through this real partnership that is embedded into the program. So firstly, we have Dorna, who is the rights holder for MotoGP, like Liberty Media would be for Formula One, for example. They provide the permissions and access, making the Rookies Cup fully a part of the MotoGP weekend. So it's not an afterthought. It's not something that happens as everybody's going home. It's a part of the weekend. And so it gives it the exposure, the credibility, the access that makes this program so successful. Then we have KTM, who is the motorcycle and parts partner. And lastly, Red Bull provides the organization and operations, also the marketing. We worked a little bit with our riders on how to develop themselves as a brand, etc. So those are the three prongs that hold up this Rookies Cup, and it makes it enormously successful. Something else that Red Bull does when it comes to not doing things alone is interdepartmental collaboration. I think in my experience, I have seen the norm be, and hopefully organizations are moving away from this, but the norm be that you have, for example, a marketing team or a marketing responsible person who is coming up with ideas and approaches, projects, collaborations on his or her own. And then once they have this idea, then they would go to legal to see if that makes sense. And then they would go to distribution or scheduling or whatever the other department may be. Then they go one by one to check if this idea that they came up with would work. Whereas where we as a brand at Red Bull saw true success was when the departments came together for that ideation phase. So it wasn't just checking up with the legal department as an afterthought, but rather making them a part of the ideation, of the creative thinking, of the what could we do, what can we not, where's the line, what resources do we have? For example, with finance is also very often an afterthought. And that's a very critical part to a marketing effort. So making the process, the ideation, collaborative interdepartmentally. And then also, I think this is something that for me has been very, very impactful, and I'll go through my CV a little bit at the end. But the personal collaborations and networking has been critical to me having had the opportunities that I had. And so here I have I've put together some guidelines of things that have helped me enrich and foster a supportive and exciting network. But if I could only leave you with one of them, it would be to not reach out only when you need something. So to nurture it before you need it. So to make sure that networking and maintaining this network is something that you're doing on a regular basis. And with that, I'll just read this quote from Mike Stive. If you want to build an effective network, you must focus on what you can do for other people, so on benefits, not what they can offer you. Be deliberate and authentic. Making others successful will do the same for you. And that's also something that Red Bull does when it comes to partnerships. I have a slide a little later where I walk you through the Red Bull approach to partnerships. It's very much a benefits focus. It's not just me, us, but rather, what are you looking for? What can we provide against that kind of partnership from the get-go? So yeah, very much a fan of nurturing it before you need it. When it comes to authenticity, something that is really that I witnessed at Red Bull especially is not taking shortcuts. So you have to really live to what you're saying. And here, for example, I include some pictures of what you may see as a hospitality in a paddock, in a MotoGP paddock, or also in a Formula One. There are these transformer style buses that have fold outs for an area to sit outside, or you see a terrace up there, etc. This is what Red Bull has done. They use 17 trucks to transport this all-wood hospitality to their races, where they serve over 1,000 meals a day, from the Rookies Cup all the way through Moto3, partners, friends of Red Bull, guests, etc. They could have done something much cheaper, much less difficult to assemble, to coordinate. They could have done something different, but Red Bull perceives itself as a premium brand, and so what we do must be premium. And that's why they have invested so heavily in this hospitality, down to the very, very small details. All of the wood being Austrian, for example. Red Bull is an Austrian brand. It was important to maintain that authenticity, even in what would go unperceived by most people who visit our hospitality. Don't make unsubstantiated claims. So this goes a bit towards the transparency that I mentioned earlier, and how important it is to fully disclose and to be so open with people, and to not lead them astray. Red Bull gives you wings. This is the slogan. That's something that many people would associate. If you saw it gives you wings, you would maybe hopefully be triggered to think of Red Bull, but it doesn't actually give you wings, right? So it opened itself up to lawsuit, especially in the US, which is where they were sued. And the outcome of that lawsuit is that Red Bull paid $10 to customers disappointed when the drink didn't actually give them wings. And it was a credit that they could apply towards product or towards merchandise, etc. But it didn't move away from the messaging after the lawsuit, because it applies to them. So it's the sense of humor. It's staying true to your philosophy. They don't mean it literally, but and it can be understood that way. They understand the risk, but they're being authentic in the statement, even if it is unsubstantiated. It doesn't actually give you wings. Don't take yourself so seriously. After all, sport is entertainment. This is something that both at FIFA and at Red Bull needed to be constantly brought to the center. That it feels, especially in a sport that is intrinsically dangerous, like motorsports, where you do have casualties and very serious injuries, and you know it can have this sort of gravitas. to remember that sport is entertainment, and to not lose that fun side of it, to keep the entertainment aspect, the fun, the emotions at the center. And I think Red Bull does very well in bringing these events. So this is soapbox race, where people come up with their own vehicles and they ride them down a hill, and then whoever gets there fastest wins, etc. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun for the teams. It's fun for the viewers. It always gets a big laugh. People are so creative. It ties in well with the brand. And it also has visibility across its more serious events. So you could see at a soapbox race, for example, a Red Bull Formula One car that has been made out of cardboard boxes or whatnot. So it really brings in the more serious elements and projects into the fun world and the entertainment world that is sports. Don't overdo it. Less is more. We worked with a partner on the Rookies Cup who was extremely frustrated because we were designing a product together that Red Bull kept coming back to them and saying, no, we need the logo smaller. The logo is too big. We need it smaller. And they're a company that has worked with many different brands. And they told us that it is the first time that they've had this issue, that usually they need to kind of elbow their way to get visibility. Whereas Red Bull doesn't want that. It's very careful and very strategic about where the logo is placed and how. So if you see this is just a random example I took off the internet, but it's a very common one of a sponsorship wall. FIFA does it, most sports organizations do, and it's just not very effective. What does this tell you about any of the brands that are featured there? What does it tell you about how them being involved in this sport benefits you or what they offer? It's not an effective tool, and it's one of these things that is just a given. If very often brands will send out sponsorship decks where they offer this kind of thing, Red Bull couldn't care less. And I agree, this adds no value. It doesn't communicate anything about the product, about your values, about why you're involved, or how it's a mute, or it can be a very muted marketing visibility point. So with that, I think what I had mentioned before about the partnership process that Red Bull uses, it was very different. As I mentioned, like in school, we learned to put together marketing packages. And also in my previous roles, that's something that we had done a lot. So the very basic, you have your 3 tiers, silver, gold, platinum, or whatever you want to call them. And you list the things that they would get and how much it is and such. Red Bull doesn't do it that way at all. It's just not, it doesn't align with the brand. What you would see more often than not, and a process that I really believe in, is that there's a brainstorming session internally. So when there's a recognition of a need of bringing in a partner for expertise or for financial contribution or for whatever it may be, it's an identification of potential partners. And this is very often done through our network. So it's not just random naming of brands. It's remembering people. It's drawing on our personal experiences working with or meeting individuals representing those brands, etc. It's a process, a group effort to identify potential partners. From there, there's an exploratory consultation. So once we do fine-tune that list, we have identified our key prospects that we would hope would be open to a conversation to come on board to a project. We approach them with the thinking of, we want to hear about your marketing needs and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? Who are you trying to talk to? How are you trying to talk to them? What are you offering them? And then based on what they provide us with, that information that they give us in this exploratory consultation, then we check against our inventory and see how we can complement it or reinforce, assist, whatever. But we don't enter that conversation with, okay, well, it sounds to me like you would need package B. Like that's very salesmanly. It's very old school. That's not a true partnership when you're just trying to see how you can kind of push your project in there. It's much better, in my opinion, to have this exploratory consultation. So as I mentioned, then you evaluate project inventory through this lens, the information that comes out of this consultation. And that means, and it's very difficult to do, having an accurate inventory of what you can really offer, looking at your walls, your areas, your access to athletes, your whatever resource it is that you may have, and seeing, are we making the most use of this? Is there somewhere where we could have more utility? Is there an opportunity that we're missing? It's having an accurate inventory list or idea of what you could offer. And then once those two things are assembled together, the consultation information with the inventory, then you present possible activations and benefits, and you talk through it, and you talk prices, and you talk long-term vision. So that's also something else that I learned very much at Red Bull, is you don't want a sponsor to come on for a year. You want to think long-term. You want to think, even if it's not something that you're communicating at this point, of course, but upselling, growing the relationship, because it takes a lot of time to onboard a brand or to develop this partnership. You don't want to do this every year. And also a philosophy that I have also seen very clearly is that having many smaller sponsors, the smaller sponsors compared to the larger ones, will take up as much of your human capital resources, so questions, favors, check-ins, approvals, etc., as a larger partner potentially could. So I know it sounds quite obvious, but if you ever have the opportunity, aim for the bigger fish, to have less partners than trying to get many small ones. Of course, that could be very different market to market. It could be that in Trinidad and Tobago, that's simply not a reality. But the smaller partners will take up as much of your resources as the larger ones. Then hopefully, finally, you secure agreement. And once again, with this long-term vision, you're always looking to renew the partnership. You're looking forward to being in a partnership that every year you're growing and fine-tuning and improving, versus a one-off. So another organization that was mentioned in the title that I worked for and that I haven't really mentioned up until now is the New York Cosmos. Some of you may be familiar with it. It had Beckenbauer and Pele and such in the 70s and 80s. It really tried to bring soccer to the US market. And I was part of their second launch, their relaunch in 2013, when they tried to do it again. So they tried to come into the US soccer market, now a much different place than it was in the 70s and 80s, with MLS and such. And the reason why, in my opinion, that Cosmos didn't join MLS, they stayed in the second division, was because MLS has centralized marketing rights. And it would mean that New York Cosmos would lose the rights to their logo, which already had all of this history and associations aligned with it, to the central powers of MLS. So they wanted to do it on their own, and hoping that the brand was strong enough to carry them through the challenge that this would be. And we made a lot of mistakes. We were very much operated like a startup. It was a very small team. And the biggest mistake that we made, I think, without question, is not knowing our audience. So what we did as an organization was that, here you have a picture from the first game where it was a sold out crowd of 13,000. What we did was market it to people from New York who we were hoping would come to Long Island, which was, I don't know, a 30-minute commute by train, so nothing too crazy, but that New Yorkers would be coming to Long Island to view the games. And that was an assumption that we made, that we based our marketing efforts on. So we had collaborations with the trains, we had visibility on platforms, we had so much in New York about it, and we were completely off the mark. So we sold out the first game, and then at every subsequent game, maybe we had 2,000 people, if that. It was really tough because we didn't get those New Yorkers back. They came for the experience, they had it, check the box, and then they weren't interested in commuting all the way to Long Island to the games. We never managed to get to this level of success again. And so we misunderstood our audience completely. If we had used our resources to foster the community around the stadium, we would have been much better off. But we built our marketing campaign on an assumption that was untested and, unfortunately for us, inaccurate. So that's a picture of what it looked like for the rest of the games. So it was very challenging. Because of that experience and us having already allocated our marketing budget for the season incorrectly, we had to learn how to do a lot with little. And this took not only a shift in team mentality, so we had to stop seeing it as that's not my role. It was very much a roll up your sleeves. Like, I was a special projects manager at the time, and I was distributing stickers in the subway. We all were. The chief of merchandising was the one that was also coming to the viewing parties and engaging with locals at the bar. And we were all hands on deck. Everybody was trying to maximize the little resources that we had left to try to save our ship. And so that's what we did. So we sat around, we thought about how we could do it with what we had access to. And we started collaborating. For example, this was one of my roles with the different embassies in New York, or consulates. So if we had a Polish player, which was the case here with Daniel Sotela, we went to them and we said, how can we work together for you as a consulate to provide something to your to the people that you serve, and us to also add to that. So to work together to provide entertainment or a community feeling, a different activity, etc. And so we this is one example. We had a Polish Pride Night, for example. And then we started doing different giveaways and trivia nights and such with sports bars around New York. And those were just really picking up the phone and calling and asking if they had a night that we could come in, and that we were looking to organize this. And we had our Cosmos Girls Dance team come in and give away things and such, to try to integrate into the community and to slowly, one by one, start to have this visibility there. And lastly, using all the tools we had access to. So this once in a lifetime, the movie about Pele and his time in the New York Cosmos, when he really brought soccer, so to speak, to the US. And we did a viewing party, and we did a special screening at the film festival and such. So using anything we could have access to, even if it wasn't new. This movie was years old at the time. To gain another conversation point. Every interaction we had that better aligned our offering was one that we considered successful. And once again, it was really all hands on deck. Don't devalue your own brand. This is also something that we did, unfortunately. So when I said that we were handing out stickers in the metro, this is where we found the stickers later. On signs, in the trash, on the floor. We had something so valuable that was the brand, the image, the logo, and we were just giving it away carelessly to people who didn't want it. We devalued it. And so then it was very disheartening, and also at the brand, just a terrible look to see the stickers in places you didn't want to see it, like a toilet, for example. And that's something that we did by accident. We didn't think of when you're giving away something for free, how that can take value from the product, from the brand. And so with that, with those learnings, I think also Red Bull's approach to marketing plans, short-term, long-term, as I mentioned before, but also this approach of making 360-degree plans. So when you have an event, something that my former boss would say a lot was this concept of owning the circle. And what he meant by that is this 360 immersive plans. So if you use as an example somebody who's going to a race or to a game, there's a before, during, and after to that event. So think beyond the event itself. There's in the before, pre-events, group organization, building the vibe, and maybe it's makeup or temporary tattoos, or it can be different activations that you have to build up this excitement before the game, and then, or the race. And then it's during, so on site, how are you engaging with consumers? And Red Bull here is very famous for its sampling, so that you can get a free can on the way in or way out, etc. It's how are you engaging as a brand? How are you bringing that experience to life? And also with athlete experiences, if you have access to an athlete or to a representative and an ambassador, how can you leverage that most effectively? And also post-event. So sport is very unique when it comes to marketing, in that when you lose, for example, it doesn't mean that it's all over and people are off your brand and you have to fully recover them. There's a loyalty in sports marketing that is very unique to sports marketing. It doesn't exist in many other industries. And so after, regardless, this is also something to consider, regardless of performance, having a plan for the post event. And also in the case of Red Bull, which is a brand that is very often affiliated with nightlife as well, the post event too. Do experiential marketing. So this ties into also what I had mentioned before about the accurate inventory. It's taking a look at what you have access to in a different way. So you, for example, Red Bull is very lucky in this sense, of course, but many organizations are too, in that they have access. We take it as a given, especially once you're longer term in an environment, you kind of lose your sensitivity to how amazing it is to be at the race or at the sideline or at whatever, to see what experiences you can offer, especially money can't buy experiences, for example, where you're really bringing somebody into this world. I mean, in Red Bull, they would call it the world of Red Bull, or into whatever environment it is that you're working in, to offer these experiences that can't be bought. This is purely the brand, a kind invitation, a warm opening that the brand has put together for its consumers. Here on the left, you can see my brother on board of one of the Rookies Cup bikes when he came to one of the races. Some of the things that we offered as a brand were the personalized experience, for example, interactive garage tours where people could get on the actual bikes, pit lane access, and then the grid. So it was seeing the race from, being able to see the riders right before they were going to take off for the race, being in the grid pre-race, and then watching from the sideline. So really offering the best of the best in terms of experiences. And this applies to not only consumers and sponsors and such, but also to the athletes. We really looked for ways to make the weekends fun and make their interactions with us exciting, and to be true advocates for them and friends for them, and to bring them into this world and to make sure that they were happy to be there as well. To make content your king. So with COVID, I think we can all agree that content gained, this content is king from I forgot his name, Bill Gates, who came up with the concept. Is something that many of us are familiar with already, but with COVID, we needed content more than ever. And so increasing the relevance and consumer impact of the content is something that was constantly a goal at Red Bull. And one of the ways that they did that was creating with purpose and not waiting for perfection. So COVID also brought, in terms of content, a very relaxing of expectations. So you no longer needed to have a perfectly polished video clip with the utmost advancement in technology to make transitions and things and such. A shaky video of somebody doing core exercises was enough to get people to tune into Instagram Live, for example. So it was moving away from this expectation of perfection to go more for creating with purpose and capturing those moments, those emotions, more than anything. But something that Red Bull does, I think, better than any brand I have ever seen, is celebrating the stories. And here, there are stories of victories. You can see those very happy moments, those podiums, those race finishes. But they also capture the stories of hardship and of effort and the human side of sports, those life stories. And that's something that's very valuable as well, bringing your athletes to be seen as people, to show their dimension, and also their intimacy with your brand, their trust of your brand, to open up their story to you. It's a very powerful communication approach. And with that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey so far and how it is that I came to be here. So I think something that happened with me is that I really feel that no opportunity has ever been too small. So when I was studying marketing in university, my brother started working for Club Tijuana, o Los Quincles de Caliente, which was then a second division team in Mexico. And I started doing my student projects around them. I needed to find somebody to do projects for anyway, and I had never had an interest in sports. I started doing my projects around them. And what that transitioned into and presenting the findings and offering those insights that I had access to through my education was becoming a sort of marketing bicultural consultant. So Tijuana is on the US-Mexican border with San Diego. And so it's a very unique environment because it's a region more so than just two cities on opposite sides of the border. There's a lot of flow and influence between the two cities, and so you have at any game thousands of people coming from the US into Mexico to watch it, and also thousands of fans living in the US side, even though it is a Mexican team. And so that was something that we through my also background in being bicultural, it was a very good fit and a very exciting thing for me to realize. It was my first exposure to sports marketing. From there, I worked in another unrelated non-sports marketing role for a year. And then I missed it. I had this taste of what it was to be in sports marketing, and I wanted it back. So I used the network there from the team, the people I had worked with, to see if there were any openings anywhere in football, in soccer. And that's how I came to, through a player agent, hear about an opening at the New York Cosmos in ticket sales. I hate sales. I am not good at it. I have a very hard time having a conversation with anyone if I know that I'm only having a conversation because I want to sell you something afterwards, or I have an agenda. I really struggle with it. I am not a natural salesperson, but they hired me for this role. And I hoped that being there, I would have the opportunity to get my foot in the door and find something else that I knew would be more fitting. And 3 weeks, I believe, after I was hired for ticket sales, I was made the special projects manager because there was a need for, especially in New York, there's a very large Hispanic community. There was a need for somebody to take on not only the Hispanic outreach and community building, but also many, as I said, we operated like a startup, many small projects that didn't have a home, we didn't really know who should be the person to take care of them. Everybody was kind of working at full speed. And so I was made special projects manager, which was kind of like the kitchen sink. And everybody, I got to work with all departments and collaborate on many different things. It was very helpful for me to have taken this role, and it worked out for me to get my foot in the door there and to then grow it to this opportunity. From there, in between New York Cosmos and Infront is when I heard about the FIFA Masters. So I came to Europe to do the FIFA Masters. I couldn't believe a program like that existed, and I was fascinated. And so I was lucky enough to get accepted into it. I went to do it, and then through the Masters, I got an offer from Infront, which is like the marketing arm of FIFA in a sense. So, for example, they do all of the sales and distribution of FIFA films. So when you're watching a World Cup and they show something from the the World Cup in Mexico footage of a shot or a penalty or whatnot, it's Infront that is doing those sales and that splicing and such. And they also manage one of FIFA's biggest partners as well. And so I felt like it was a sister role to FIFA. I had applied for FIFA and not gotten the job. And so I felt like this was a close enough fit. And unfortunately, it wasn't. It was a misstep, and it was not the right decision. If I wanted FIFA, I should have kept fighting for it. There were other opportunities that I could have gone for, and I didn't take a risk when I could have, in not accepting this offer and trying to really go for something that was a better fit. And so I learned through that experience to evaluate and redirect. And I also felt, for some reason, that I had to continue. So I had been there for a few months and I already knew it wasn't working. And instead of just cutting my losses and trying to go for something else, I had this idea that I needed to have this experience on my CV for a certain amount of time, or to complete my term or whatnot. And looking back, that's also something that I would question or encourage questioning, is if it doesn't feel right, and there's other options, to question why it is that you feel you have to stay there longer, for example. From Infront, I went to Red Bull. I joined the team as a sports partnerships graduate, which is another way of saying intern. And I'll discuss this more in a little bit. But once I was there as an intern, there was an opening in the motorsport team for an international manager, and they needed somebody because Dorna, the company I mentioned before that owns the marketing rights to MotoGP, is a Spanish company. Many people in motorsport are Spanish, whether it's, especially in two-wheel motorsport, whether it's mechanics, brands, Dorna itself, etc. Spanish is a real necessity, or a real tool to have in order to establish those relationships. And so they were looking for somebody who really, I fit the profile very well. And so then they begrudgingly let me leave this internship program to join as a full-time international manager. And I personally credit that to, luck as well. But when I joined as a graduate, even though I had already at this point, I believe, 6 years of sports marketing experience, and the graduate program was intended for undergraduate students, not graduate students, I joined as if I was joining Red Bull as a CEO. I was so excited and enthusiastic and committed, and worked really hard and networked and such. I took off at full speed. I joined. I didn't care what my title was. My title could have been coffee bringer, and I would have joined with the same enthusiasm. And I think that caught the attention of who would later become my boss in motorsport. And that work ethic and these aspects of my character that I had made an effort to share or to demonstrate were what made it possible for me to get this role, because I not only have never worked in motorsport, I didn't know a single thing about it. And it was I was able to come into the team with that honesty of my shortcomings in terms of experience in motorsport, but I was also able to bring in this other perspective from football and what was, compare and contrast and learnings and such. And it was, in my opinion, a really wonderful experience. And between Red Bull and FIFA, I had my baby. And so I was on maternity leave, and then my colleague from the FIFA Masters reached out to me because they were looking for mentors for their technical directors, particularly mentors who spoke Spanish. So again, this language was a huge door opener for me. And what started out being something that I did 2 hours a month turned into a full-time consultancy role as a technical leadership expert that I'm doing at the moment. And I think, again, here it was I credit it to maintaining my intensity. So even though it was a very small role at the beginning, I was eager to contribute, to be a part of the team, and so I think that's what in combination again with luck, but I think that this is what gave me the opportunity to join this amazing team. I mentioned in the opening when I was speaking about Anton that we were in a workshop in Japan together. And one of the things that we learned there at the workshop, because we really tried to bring in the cultures from the places where we're going into our presentations, was this concept of kintsugi. So what it translates into roughly is embracing imperfections. So you can see this broken pottery piece here on the left. Maybe it's something that you have seen before. They will use gold to join the broken pieces together and make something more valuable than it was before, even though it was broken. So even though it's a broken pottery piece, it's more valuable now than it was when it was intact. And the philosophy there, as it says below, is that scars should not be hidden. So it's a way about acknowledging breakages and repairs and forming part of our history. Scars beautify the object, and ultimately it's what makes us all unique. And with that, I introduced this concept that I also learned about in Japan that I just found fascinating, the CV of failures. You can Google it, because I think it really emphasizes this resilience that we have. I think it's very cool that I can put these logos of these big companies that I've worked for and such. But what really got me through and what really gave me those opportunities were all of my failures. So here I have some of my highlights. I was fired from my first marketing job post-university. I was the lowest performer at the Cosmos for ticket sales. I could not have done any worse. Even though, as I mentioned before, had work experience, I took 2 internships, and one of them was clearly aimed for undergraduates, and I still applied, and I wasn't breaking their rules, even though it wasn't intended for a graduate student. And so I was an intern at almost 30 years old for a program that was intended for much younger students. And then another thing at Red Bull, when I knew I was pregnant and I hadn't informed my team, that I received a promotion offer that was later rescinded. And because I couldn't fulfill the role because I was going to be going on leave. And so I had a retracted promotion offer. And on top of that, I had hundreds of unsuccessful job interviews, applications, and ideas. I graduated from university in 2008, the housing crisis in the US. It was a very difficult time in order to secure a job. And yeah, really, when I say hundreds of unsuccessful job interviews and applications, I mean it. And the same for businesses, a million ideas I've had of companies I can start or projects that would take off, etc., that didn't pan out. But I think that this is what has led me to the highlights I mentioned before of being promoted, a new position being created just for me based on my responsibilities and abilities, of joining the motorsport team. If I had ever applied for this role as an external, I would have never made it past the screening tool. I would have never spoken to a person at Red Bull, I am sure of it. And after I joined the team as a junior manager, I was promoted to manager 1 year later. And the offer that I received was to become the first woman ever to become the head of the international two-wheel department. That's a huge highlight, even if it didn't end up happening. And then I was recruited to join the team of leadership experts for FIFA. If I had applied for that job, I would not have fit the profile, because I do not come from a leadership development background. But once again, having this different perspective was something that I was able to use or this different background was something that I was able to use to my advantage to differentiate myself once I had already, through my networking and community building, created this relationship with the person who ended up bringing me on board. So once again, I emphasize, no opportunity has ever been too small, resilience, and identifying opportunities in the most challenging of places. Whether it's getting fired or having a promotion rescinded or having no budget for your program, etc., finding these opportunities, celebrating the flaws and our mishaps of life, and once again, keeping this kintsugi philosophy at our core. Breakages and repairs form our history and where we are today. So a call to embrace imperfections. And just in closing, I wanted to share this with you as well. It's the Red Bull Wing Finder. It's a publicly available tool that's online. You can Google it, and it's in many languages if you have another preferred language. And basically, it helps you find your strengths, your professional strengths. So it asks you different questions. There's puzzles. There's all sorts of things that it uses to measure but especially when I was going through the job search, it helped me, once again, the matter of perspective, see myself through a different lens, and also different words and different phrasing of what I could contribute as a professional or to a team. So in case that is of use to you, I leave that for your consideration. And lastly, a thank you from my side for having joined in, and also any questions that you may have, I would now open the floor to you.
So, hi, Marianne. We have a few questions in the chat. I will read it out. The first one is from Kapil Ramcharan. Hi, Marianne. As a certified sport marketer with an internship at Caribbean Premier League 2022, I found it hard to find my way in the industry.
I can see, I can't hear you. I don't know if the others can, but I can see his question here. To find my way in the industry here locally, where opportunities are limited compared to the US, for instance, what are some additional advice you would give for me to gain further experience? I have a knowledge of most sports, for instance, the FIFA World Cup, and I am thinking about exploring the content marketing route. I mean, Kapil, have you used, for example, LinkedIn to find people that are in roles that you would look up to or aspire to see if there's any opportunity for collaboration or for further learning with them? I think now there's a lot of opportunities in online, so freelance work, remote work. I'm not sure if those, I mean, are those areas you have explored already? Can anyone hear me? Or is it my internet that has gone?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay.
Kapil, I don't know if he's on or he will answer.
Okay, all good. I just wasn't sure if
Okay.
it was for me. But those are things that I would explore. I think LinkedIn is a really great tool for finding people and building this community. I know I have responded to and worked with people that have reached out to me on LinkedIn that I didn't know personally, but I could see where we connected and where there was overlap, and I was very happy to build that relationship there. So I would encourage using it as a tool, and yeah, keep at it. Resilience. Question for Q&A session. What are some examples of your marketing strategies used to successfully appeal to rural, less populated, financially unfortunate communities? I mean, it's so what I have, so this can vary very greatly, right? Because we have communities that we serve where even the federation is sharing one phone that provides a hotspot for people to log in, send their email, and then log off. And so me saying that here we use content, and for example, the digital red carpet that is used in Formula One, where people can sign in, and then you have this opportunity to chat with the driver of your choice for a few minutes, or to wish them luck on a race, etc. These are things I think the digital world can be a huge bridge in reaching out if they have internet, of course. But I think also seeing, making use of your own resources and seeing what you could bring to them. So meeting them where they are instead of trying to bring them to you. Maybe it's organizing something for their community, in their community. Maybe it's providing transport from their community to a game or to an event. It's seeing how you can bridge where they are to where you are, and provide a benefit. I think if the focus is on providing a benefit, whether it's entertainment or access, exposure, resources, then you're on the right track to finding solutions. Given that sport is entertainment without boundaries, what are the most effective ways FIFA, for example, has kept their legacy stakeholders invested and interested without alienating new ones, and vice versa, especially in member countries with varying stances on issues? Yeah, I mean it's FIFA is a very political organization. It's something this varying stances on issues is something that's very sensitive. We saw it, for example, in the Qatar World Cup with alcohol. Whereas for many it's a given. How can you have a football tournament without beer? We saw that there's there's a balance there that is very sensitive. And also I think here I can also, as I think of your question, I think of also this lack of transparency. So there are conversations that happen more discreetly between, for example, Anheuser-Busch and FIFA that I have no privilege or information on whatsoever. I wasn't a part of those conversations, but they managed to keep one of their biggest sponsors happy and on board, and at the same time respect the culture of Qatar and Muslims not drinking, and how offensive it would be to them to have alcohol at their stadiums and such. And it bridge that and find a solution. And they didn't have to disclose to the public what it is that happened or what agreement was made, but clearly there was one, and it worked out for everybody. So I think I mean, the most effective ways is maintaining communication. Once again, nurturing before you need it, making sure that there's routine check-ins, evaluations, of clearly identified team members that are responsible for certain relationships. Relationship management, I think, is what it really comes down to. And especially in a world like sports, where the line between business, entertainment, personal is blurred, because it's all it's a very unique industry. It's not like pharmaceuticals, I would imagine, that has like a very clear distinction and very set and established parameters of what is appropriate and what is not. I think in sports you have this blurred area where you want to work with people that are fun for you to work with, that you enjoy working with, or that add something to you as a person, as a professional, because the hours are very long, and the events are frequent and such. You want to manage those relationships effectively. With the growing interest in artificial intelligence, will there be a demand for sports marketing practitioners? I hope so. But with the growing, I think artificial intelligence can only go so far, because even though they can be programmed, artificial intelligence is quite sensitive. Sport is emotion, and when it comes to storytelling, I can't see a computer understanding, despite its sensitivity, understanding fully the full spectrum of human emotion and where the story really is, and such. And I think storytelling is such a critical part of sports marketing, especially. And so I would hope that, and I'm a huge fan of artificial intelligence. I use it a lot in our workshops. It's a fascinating field, a growing field, but I don't personally feel threatened by it, because I see sports marketing as so much more than creating a logo or a slogan. It's successful 360-degree planning, etc. It involves a complexity that it takes an expert to know, because also artificial intelligence works on what you put into it. So if there isn't a sports marketing practitioner that is inputting what all the different components that would make a very comprehensive or good approach or plan or whatnot, you won't get that out. It's only as good as what you put into AI. So that's my hope. I have, and in the process of exploring, need to type as I am in a noisy background. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Capu. That was in regards to the previous question. What recommendations do you have for small countries like Trinidad and Tobago, where the marketing pool is much smaller, population of 1.3 million, in comparison to the larger countries like the US? I mean, recommendations in terms of sponsorship or in terms of event activation, I think this question is a bit broad. I think small countries have a benefit of being, so for example, you see Chile, right? Huge country, very long. It's very difficult logistically to engage with people on opposite ends of the country, to even get product to different people, to bring them to a place together, to have commonalities. Sometimes there's language differences, cultural differences, religious differences that separate people that are in larger countries, whereas smaller ones could potentially have that to their benefit, where you have a much tighter community with much more commonalities that you can leverage and tie into and understand also. I think that could be an area where the opportunity lies. And also, once again, going back to relationship building, which is such a core part of sports marketing, it's the opportunity to engage and to meet in person and to build these relationships over time. I would imagine that Trinidad and Tobago is a place where people know each other, and you have a connection over a longer term than a very transient place like New York City, for example, where people are there for a bit and then they leave, and it's a very fast-paced place. I think those are approaches that should be central to any ideas that are thrown out, just keeping that culture at the core. Thank you. Locally, we're not exactly there in terms of using VR and AR. Would that lack of tech hold us back, especially on the global stage, noting that many persons are not versed in newer tech? I've noticed that recently the traditional media still goes a very long way domestically for us. I think here AR and VR hasn't held back the development of sports so far. It has only improved it. So I think you don't have to quite be there in order to, in the future, come fully on board also. Especially, for example, with video technology, it's taken so many missteps. And slowly but surely, we're coming up with FIFA, for example, is coming up with so many inexpensive and more accessible ways of going about it through these learnings, through these missteps, that I think just because you're not exactly there doesn't mean that you couldn't be in the near future. But I also don't think it's a handicap for development in the same way that sport has grown phenomenally in places that haven't had it as well. So if you, as you say, you've noticed the traditional media still goes a very long way domestically for us, that's great. It's great that there's one medium that you've identified that is working, and until something else enhances that, I think it's having at least one way that is effective is a very good place to be in. Thank you, Pierre, for your feedback. What are some of the challenges a marketer would face in promoting a World Cup event in the Caribbean? A World Cup event, I imagine that you mean a football event, or is this a general sporting event where there's international competitors coming to the Caribbean? I mean, it would be, this is I feel like quite a locally specific question. So some of the challenges, I mean, as an external, again, understanding the culture. So if I were to go into Trinidad and Tobago and try to market an event without having an accurate understanding of the audience, I think that's a very dangerous position to be in, a very risky one. But if you are a local and you understand it, it's connecting what relevance does. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm one of the very lucky ones. And there's France coming in to play Thailand in a football match, in a football friendly, and I'm trying to promote it. What relevance does that have for my community? How can I make that appealing to them? Not just because it's maybe a high level of sportsmanship, but in the sense of how can I add value to my community in bringing in this international presence, keeping it once again benefits focused to the community that you're trying to engage in. But I think anytime there's a difference in culture between a marketer and an event or a market, that's an area that would need a bridge. So you would need somebody on your team who could help you manage that and avoid the pitfalls that come with it, any tone deaf marketing or misassessment of the audience. Simple question: would you recommend the Red Bull model of marketing for smaller entities, or would this strategy only do well with larger organizations? I think it's not so much. So, for example, the Red Bull model of marketing would not work for FIFA. So it's not so much, and that's also a large organization. I think it's not so much the size of the organization, but the values. So what I would more so start with identifying the values of the brand, of the organization, and then trying to see, for example, I'm a big believer in marketing research, finding other brands that maybe have that same value and seeing how they leverage it or how they communicated what they're doing, just even if it's just for inspiration or guidance, and then later on you go and do your own thing. I don't think that what works, especially for a very established brand like Red Bull, even though it feels very young, it's 35 years old or so, if you don't have to take the whole thing, so you can take bits and pieces from brands, from organizations, and apply it, modify it to suit your needs and to be authentic to your organization. So it's not so much a matter of the size or budget, but rather the fit, the authenticity, in my opinion. Thank you, Stefan. All right, I think that was the last question.
Okay, seems like it. Shirley, you have anything to say?
Hold on. I enjoy the lecture. It's always good to get a different perspective and something that we talk about every day.
Shirley, we're not hearing you clearly.
Oh, you're not hearing me?
No.
Hold on. Oh, hold on. Okay. Right, hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
better.
All right, here. I had the thing. But anyway, I just say thank you for the information. It's always good to get a different perspective on the same subject matter, sports marketing. So you hearing me, right?
Mm-hmm. I can hear you.
You're on mute, Shirley. We were hearing you before. Technical problems. Okay. Yeah, so just to continue with what Shirley was saying, is that it's always good to have we hear about sports marketing as one of our topics within the program. So it's always good to hear a different perspective on the same topic. One of our lecturers were actually on the session. It would have been nice to hear from him to see his input based on your presentation. But I think the information that you provided, some for the students who are listening on, it would have cemented what we heard from him, and because we had that session last semester. So I think what you spoke about basically would have covered and delve more into the topic at hand. So we greatly appreciate the presentation, and we thank you so much for the information provided.
Thank you very much.
Anything, but we thank you.
Thank you. It would have been such a pleasure to be there in person. I'm really disappointed to not have been able to enjoy my time in Trinidad and Tobago, hopefully in the future.
Yes, hopefully in the future. So we will welcome you with open arms.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. The information will be sent to you soon.
Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your weekend.